The emergency lights in the Galactic Council chamber cast long shadows across the faces of 100 different species. Ambassador Velkara of the Rennie Collective stood at the center podium, her 3 eyes blinking in sequence as she processed the data streaming across her neural implant. What she was about to present would change everything the Council understood about the human species. "Honored members," she began, her voice carrying the tremor of someone who had seen something they couldn't quite believe. 17 days ago, the Chromath Empire dispatched an expeditionary fleet of 43 warships toward human border space. Their mission was reconnaissance and intimidation. Standard procedure for the Chromath when dealing with species they consider inferior. She paused, letting the tension build. "The entire fleet has vanished." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Chromath representative, a towering figure with crimson scales, rose from his seat. "Vanished? You mean destroyed?" "Say what you mean, Ambassador." "The humans attacked without provocation." Velkara's middle eye fixed on him. "No, Warlord Krath. I mean vanished. We have sensor data from the final moments. Would you like to see what happened?" The chamber lights dimmed. Holographic displays materialized above each seat, showing the tactical plot of the Chromath fleet's final hours. The formation looked textbook perfect as they approached what appeared to be a lightly defended human colony world called New Perth. 3 more human settlements dotted the system, each one showing minimal military presence. It should have been an easy demonstration of Chromath superiority. Then everything went wrong at once. The civilian mining stations that the Chromath had dismissed activated weapons that shouldn't have existed on commercial platforms. Asteroid fields that had been mapped as natural hazards suddenly shifted, revealing coordinated movement patterns. Debris that had cluttered the system's outer edge began firing missiles that had been waiting in cold storage for decades. And the colonies themselves lit up with defensive grids that turned the space around them into killing fields. The Chromath fleet found itself not attacking a target, but trapped inside a box made of overlapping fire zones, gravity wells that pulled ships off course, and coordinated strikes coming from every direction. They never reached orbit around a single human world. They died in the empty space between planets, turned into wreckage by an enemy they never saw up close. The hologram ended. Silence filled the chamber. "This was no ambush," Velkara continued. "This was a prepared defense that had been in place for years, possibly decades. Our intelligence services have been investigating human colonies since this incident. What we've discovered is disturbing." A human stepped forward from the observation gallery. Colonel Sarah Chun moved with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous she was. The Council had allowed human observers for 3 years now, but this was the first time one had been granted permission to speak. "Honored Council," Sarah said, her voice carrying easily through the acoustically perfect chamber. "I've been authorized by the Terran government to explain our defensive philosophy. We believe transparency might prevent future misunderstandings." Warlord Krath's scales rattled with agitation. "Your defensive philosophy destroyed an entire fleet. Your fleet entered our space with weapons armed and shields raised," Sarah replied calmly. "But yes, we destroyed them. Would you like to know how?" She didn't wait for an answer. With a gesture, she brought up new displays. These showed human colony worlds in detail, and what the Council saw made several representatives lean forward in disbelief. New Perth looked like a garden world on the surface. Cities nestled among forests and oceans. Farms stretched across fertile plains. But beneath that peaceful exterior lay something else entirely. Underground networks connected every settlement to massive bunker complexes. The farms were positioned to double as supply depots, with hardened storage facilities hidden beneath grain silos. Every city block contained weapon caches and emergency fortifications. The orbital space around the planet wasn't just monitored by satellites, but by disguised weapons platforms that looked like commercial infrastructure. We learned from Earth's history, Sarah explained. Every human civilization that failed to fortify what it built eventually fell to those who did. When we left Earth and started claiming new worlds, we made a decision. Every single planet we settle will be built from the ground up to be defensible. She pulled up more examples. Colony after colony showed the same pattern. Humans didn't just build cities and hope for peace. They built fortresses that happened to have cities inside them. Mining operations doubled as sensor networks. Merchant stations carried military-grade weapons. Even their civilian ships could be rapidly converted for combat roles. "You're describing a civilization living in perpetual fear," observed Council Speaker Threnody, her crystalline form chiming softly with each word. "We're describing a civilization that takes survival seriously," Sarah corrected. "We don't start wars, Speaker. We end them. Decisively. Every world we touch becomes a place that cannot be taken by force. Not because we want to fight, but because we want to make fighting as pointless." Valkara brought up the final piece of data, the one that had brought true fear into her hearts. The humans have been in space for 217 years. In that time, they've established settlements on 847 worlds. According to our intelligence, every single one has been fortified to the same degree as New Perth. The implications crashed through the Council like a shockwave. 847 fortress worlds. Not spread randomly, but positioned along key trade routes and strategic choke points. Not clustered together for easy conquest, but spread across space in a pattern that made attacking any of them a nightmare of logistics and coordination. "You've turned your entire civilization into a military installation," Warlord Kraft said. And for the first time, his voice carried respect rather than contempt. "We've turned our civilization into something that will still be here in 10,000 years," Sarah replied. "Every fortress world is a promise. You cannot take this from us. You cannot make us refugees. You cannot erase us. We will be here on these worlds for as long as stars burn." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from 100 species. "The Chromoth learned this lesson the hard way. We hope the rest of you can learn it peacefully. Humanity doesn't want your worlds. We don't want your resources. We don't even want your respect. We just want to be left alone to build our fortresses in peace." The session ended with no formal resolution, but everyone in the chamber understood that something fundamental had changed. The humans had rewritten the rules of galactic strategy. Space wasn't empty anymore. It was full of fortresses, and the paths between them had become a labyrinth where aggression went to die dot as the delegates filed out. Valkara caught Sarah's eye. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why go to such extremes?" Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Because, Ambassador, the universe is full of species like the Chromoth. And we decided long ago that we would never again be at the mercy of someone else's goodwill. We'll build walls until we feel safe. Based on galactic history, that might take a while." 10 years after the Chromoth incident, the Xian Collective made their move. They were not like the Chromoth, who relied on brute force and intimidation. The Zan were strategists, patient and methodical. Their war scholars had spent a decade studying human defensive patterns, analyzing every scrap of intelligence they could gather. They believed they had found a weakness in humanity's fortress doctrine. Hi, Commander Zex stood before the Collective's War Council, his segmented body coiled with confidence. "The humans have made a fatal error," he announced, gesturing to the tactical display that showed human space mapped in precise detail. "They have built static defenses. Fortresses cannot move. They cannot pursue. They can only wait and react." The War Council listened as Zexith outlined his plan. The Zan would not attack the fortress worlds directly. Instead, They would use their superior numbers and recently discovered hyperspace corridors to bypass the outer defensive line entirely. They would strike deep into human territory, moving too fast for the static defenses to respond. By the time the fortress worlds realized what was happening, Zon forces would control the space between them, cutting off supplies and communications. "We will turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness," Zexith declared. "Their fortresses will become their prisons." The invasion began 3 months later. 500 Zon warships entered human space through 4 different hyperspace corridors that intelligence suggested were unknown to human forces. The first phase went exactly as planned. Zon fleets emerged behind the human outer colonies, racing past fortress worlds that scrambled to respond, but couldn't intercept the fast-moving attackers. Captain Vrix commanded the Vanguard fleet, 20 heavy cruisers that knifed through human space like a blade. His sensors showed the fortress worlds falling behind, their defense grids unable to reach his ships. Ahead lay the human core systems, supposedly softer targets that had relied on the outer fortresses for protection. "All ships maintain acceleration," Rix ordered. "We're through their defensive line. New Providence system is 3 days ahead. That's where we establish our foothold." But on the second day, things began to go wrong in small ways that, built into something terrible, the asteroid field they passed on day 1 suddenly activated. What their sensors had classified as natural rocks turned out to be disguised weapons platforms, ancient and cold-stored but now very much alive. They fired once, destroying 2 of Rix's escorting destroyers, then went dark again before a counterstrike could be launched. The merchant station they had detected and dismissed as dismissed. Irrelevant lit up with military-grade sensors and began broadcasting their position to every human ship in 3 systems. The nebula they skirted around to save time turned into a killing field when autonomous minds, seated decades ago and waiting in patient silence, activated and began hunting Zone ships with single-minded determination. "This doesn't make sense," Vrix's tactical officer reported, his voice edged with confusion. "These defenses aren't connected to the fortress worlds we passed. They're independent systems, scattered throughout empty space. It's like the humans weaponized the void itself." By day 3, Rix had lost 8 ships to attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. Worse, every human fortress world they had bypassed was now launching rapid response fleets. These weren't the massive defensive armadas that guarded the planets. These were smaller, faster strike groups that had been hiding in stealth orbits, waiting for exactly this scenario. The Zen had assumed the fortress worlds were static. They were wrong. Each fortress was a node in a network, connected by communication relays and coordinated by strategic AI that had been running invasion scenarios for years. The humans hadn't just fortified their planets. They had fortified the space between their planets. Vrix reached New Providence system with 12 ships left. What he found waiting for him ended any hope of victory. The system looked empty on long-range sensors. No massive defense fleet. No obvious fortress installations. Just a single inhabited planet and the usual commercial traffic of a developed colony. It was a trap so obvious that Vrix should have recognized it, but by then, he had no choice. His fleet was being hunted from behind by those rapid response groups. And New Providence was supposed to be his refuge. He entered the system and learned the truth about human fortress doctrine. The commercial traffic were Q-ships, merchant vessels with hidden military armaments. The orbital stations weren't civilian infrastructure, but disguised weapons platforms. The planet itself was ringed with defense satellites that had been watching his approach for hours, tracking his vector and calculating firing solutions. And hiding behind the planet's moon, completely invisible to his sensors, was a defense fleet that had been positioned there before even started. They knew Rix whispered as his sensors finally revealed the trap. They knew we'd come this way. They knew which route we'd take. They'd been waiting for us. The battle lasted 4 hours. It wasn't a battle at all, really. It was an execution. The humans had turned the entire star system into a kill box, with overlapping fields of fire and carefully prepared fallback positions. Every time Rix tried to maneuver, he found human weapons already positioned to intercept. Every time he tried to retreat, another defense element activated behind him. His last transmission was recorded by a Zun intelligence ship lurking at the system's edge. All commands, abort invasion. Repeat, abort. The fortress worlds weren't the defense. They're just the anchors. The humans have fortified everything. Every asteroid, every station, every empty patch of space. There's no front line here. There's no rear area. It's all contested ground. We're not invading human space. We're walking into a labyrinth, and every turn leads to another wall. The message reached High Commander Zexith 48 hours later. By then, 3 of his 5 invasion fleets had been destroyed or crippled. The other 2 were fighting desperate retreats, harried by human strike groups that seemed to anticipate their every move. The Zan were losing 60 ships for every human fortress they even got close to, and they hadn't conquered a single world. The War Council met in emergency session. The numbers were devastating. In 2 weeks of fighting, the Xian Collective had lost over 300 warships. Human casualties were measured in the low hundreds, mostly crew from those rapid response groups that had engaged in direct combat. Not a single human fortress world had even been threatened, much less taken. How? One counselor demanded. How did they do this? We studied them for 10 years. The intelligence minister, an ancient Zan who had survived 5 wars, provided the answer. They've been building this network for 200 years. Every fortress world they established became an anchor point. Every piece of infrastructure they put in space became part of the defense grid. They didn't just fortify their planets. They fortified their entire civilization. And they did it so slowly, so methodically, that we didn't see the pattern until we were trapped inside it. 3 days later, the Zan Collective sued for peace. The human terms were simple and non-negotiable. A demilitarized zone would be established between Zan and human space. No Zan military vessels would approach human territory without explicit permission, granted on a case-by-case basis. The Zan would pay reparations for the destroyed defense platforms and mines they had triggered. There was no occupation, no conquest, no humiliation beyond the military defeat itself. The humans simply wanted the Zhuan to go away and never threaten them again. As the treaty was signed aboard a neutral station, the Zan ambassador asked the question that haunted his entire species. Why? Why build all of this? The resources, the time, the coordination required. You've turned your entire civilization into a defensive network. What are you so afraid of? The human representative, the same Colonel Sarah Chun, who had addressed the council a decade before, looked at him with tired eyes. Everything, she said simply. We're afraid of everything, and we'll keep building walls until we're not afraid anymore. 30 years after the Zhen War, the galaxy had learned to live with the reality of human fortress worlds. Trade routes bent around human space, like water flowing around stones. Diplomatic missions approached human territory with formal requests submitted months in advance. No military fleet came within 10 light years of a human colony without explicit permission. The humans had not conquered anyone, but they had changed everything. Dr. Thurin Kai stood before a lecture hall filled with alien military officers at the Galactic Strategic Institute. He was one of the few humans who traveled freely through alien space, teaching the philosophy behind humanity's defensive doctrine. The officers watched him with a mixture of respect and unease. You all know what we've built, Theron began. his voice calm and professorial. 847 fortress worlds, each one capable of defending itself against any conventional attack. What you might not understand is why we built them. A Rennie officer raised one of her 3 hands. Your species lives in constant fear. That's what everyone says. You fortify because you cannot imagine peace. Theron smiled. We fortify because we can imagine war. There's a difference. Every species in this room comes from a homeworld that was never invaded, never conquered, never reduced to rubble by someone else's ambitions. Earth was different. We spent 10,000 years fighting each other. And we learned a simple truth. The only guarantee of survival is making yourself too expensive to attack. He pulled up a holographic display showing human fortress worlds scattered across space. Each of these worlds is a statement. You cannot take this from us, but together they form a greater message. There are places in this galaxy where aggression dies. We don't want your territory. We don't want to rule you. We just want to make sure no one can ever rule us. The lecture continued for another hour, covering tactical details and strategic philosophy. The officers asked hard questions about resource allocation, civilian morale, and the psychological cost of living in a perpetual fortress. Theron answered them all with the patience of someone who'd explained these concepts 1,000 times. But that afternoon, everything changed. The first reports came from the Galactic Rim. An unknown species, moving in swarm formations, was consuming entire worlds. They didn't negotiate, didn't communicate, didn't seem to have any interest in anything except resources. The Vex, as they came to be called, moved through space like locusts, stripping planets of biomass and minerals before moving to the next target. Within 3 months, 5 civilizations had fallen. The Teremi hegemony, 2 million years old, was reduced to scattered refugee fleets. The Plenith worlds, renowned for their art and philosophy, went silent as the Vex consumed their 3 homeworlds. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, but for the first time in its history, it had no answers. The Vex didn't care about politics or threats or economic sanctions. They just advanced, system by system, world by world, an endless tide of biological ships that reproduced faster than conventional forces could destroy them. Then they reached human space. The initial contact happened at a colony world called Darwin's Edge, a fortress world on the human frontier. The local defense coordinator, Commander Park Minji, watched as Vex bioships entered her system in a formation that stretched for millions of kilometers. There were thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, and her sensors suggested they were still accelerating. She activated the defense grid and sent out the standard warning on all frequencies. No response came back. The Vex simply kept coming, their bioships sprouting weapon growths as they approached. All batteries, prepare to fire, Minji ordered. Show them what a fortress world can do. The battle lasted 6 days. The Vex threw themselves at Darwin's Edge in waves that never seemed to end. They didn't use sophisticated tactics or clever maneuvers. They just came forward accepting catastrophic losses, trying to overwhelm the defenses through sheer numbers. And they failed. The fortress worlds overlapping. Defense grids created kill zones that destroyed Vex ships by the hundreds. Automated systems that never tired kept firing, even as human crews rested in shifts. The underground bunkers that honeycombed the planet proved impossible for Vex landing forces to crack. And when the Vex tried to bypass the planet and move deeper into human space, they ran into the same network of hidden defenses that had destroyed the Zeon decades earlier. By the time the Vex withdrew, they had lost over 12,000 bioships. Human casualties numbered in the low hundreds, mostly crew from the rapid response groups that had hunted down Vex stragglers. Darwin's Edge itself was untouched, its cities and farms continuing to function throughout the battle. Commander Park sent her report to Terran Command with a single additional note. They don't care about casualties. They'll keep coming until we make it too expensive. Recommend we make it very, very expensive. And humanity did exactly that. Over the next year, the Vex smashed themselves against human fortress worlds like waves against cliffs. Every attack failed, and every failure cost them more resources than they could extract. Humans began employing scorched earth tactics, destroying resources rather than letting them fall into Vex hands. If a fortress world was truly threatened, the humans would evacuate the population and turn the entire planet into a trap, seeding it with weapons that would activate when the Vex tried to consume it. The Vex advance ground to a halt at the human border. For the first time since they had appeared, the swarm stopped moving forward. They couldn't break through, and trying to do so cost more biomass than they gained. The rest of the galaxy watched in amazement. Dozens of civilizations had fallen to the Vex, but humanity's fortress worlds had held. And behind those fortresses, something unprecedented began to happen. Refugee fleets from conquered worlds started appearing at human borders, begging for sanctuary. The Teremi survivors, the scattered Pleneth, the remains of a dozen other species, all fleeing the Vex and hoping that human defenses would protect them. The Galactic Council, now meeting aboard a human fortress station for security, debated what to do. Ambassador Velkara, now an elder stateswoman with decades of experience, addressed the assembly. "We face a choice," she said, her three eyes reflecting the holographic displays showing Vex advances across the galaxy. "We can continue as separate civilizations, falling one by one to this threat. Or we can accept what humanity has been trying to teach us for 2 centuries. Survival requires walls. Strong walls. Walls that cannot fall." The human representative, now Admiral Marcus Webb, who had succeeded the retired Colonel Chun, stood to speak. "Humanity will share our fortress-building methodology with any species willing to adopt it. But there's a cost. You must commit to the same philosophy we have. No wars of expansion. No conquest. Every world becomes a fortress, and every fortress becomes part of the defensive network." The debate raged for weeks. Many species saw this as humanity posing its paranoid worldview on everyone else. Others argued it was their only hope. The vote came down to a single deciding ballot. Velkara cast it in favor of the proposal. "I've spent 30 years studying humanity," she said. "I've called them paranoid, militaristic, obsessed with defense to the point of madness. But they were right. The galaxy is dangerous. It always has been. The humans just had the courage to admit it and do something about it." The Fortress Compact was signed the next day. Humanity would teach other species how to build fortresses, how to network defenses, how to make every world into a place that could not be taken. In return, those species would abandon wars of conquest and commit to mutual defense. As the delegates filed out, Admiral Webb stood at the observation window, watching the stars. Beside him, Velkara spoke quietly. "You've changed the galaxy," she said. "For better or worse, the age of easy conquest is over." Webb nodded. "That was always the point. We didn't want to conquer the galaxy. We wanted to make it unconquerable. Looks like we succeeded." 80 years after the Fortress Compact was signed, the galaxy had transformed into something unrecognizable from what it had been. Where once there were hundreds of independent civilizations, constantly jockeying for position and resources, now there was a network of fortress worlds that spanned across known space. The change had been slow, generational, but complete. Cadet Krothy of the Chrometh Defense Force stood in the observation deck of a transport ship, watching her destination grow larger in the viewport. New Perth, the same human colony world that had destroyed her great-grandfather's fleet a century ago, now served as the primary training center for the Compact's Joint Military Academy. She was both excited and nervous. The Chromath had once been conquerors. Now they were students. The transport docked with the orbital station, and Krathi made her way through the crowds of cadets from a dozen different species. A guide was waiting at the main concourse, a human named Lieutenant Chun, great-granddaughter of the famous Colonel Sarah, Chen, who had first explained humanity's fortress doctrine to the Galactic Council. "Welcome to New Perth," Chun said, offering the traditional Chromath greeting with surprising accuracy. "I hope you're ready for the graduation tour. It's going to be educational." Over the next 3 days, Chun showed Krathi every aspect of a mature fortress world. They walked through underground bunker complexes that could house the entire population during an attack. They visited farms that looked peaceful but contained hidden supply depots and emergency armories. They toured factories that produced civilian goods in peacetime but could switch to military production within hours. "This is what confused your great-grandfather's generation," Chun explained as they stood in a park overlooking one of New Perth's major cities. "They saw the weapons and defenses and thought we were warlike. They didn't understand that all of this exists, so we never have to use it." Krathi looked at the city below. Children played in playgrounds. People walked along tree-lined streets. Cafes and shops bustled with activity. It looked nothing like a military installation. Yet she knew that beneath the peaceful surface lay a defense network that could destroy a fleet. "How do you live like this?" she asked, "knowing that everything around you is built for war?" Chun smiled. "We don't think of it as living for war. We think of it as living without fear. My great-grandmother used to say the walls don't make you a prisoner unless you build them on the inside. We built ours on the outside, facing outward, so everyone inside could live in peace." That evening, Krathi attended a cultural festival in the city center. Music from a dozen worlds filled the air. Food stalls offered cuisine from civilizations spread across the galaxy. She saw Reni children playing with human kids, Zan scholars debating philosophy with Teremi refugees who had made New Perth their home after the Vex destroyed their worlds. "This is what the Compact really protects," Chun said, watching the festival. "Not territory, not resources. This. Different people living together, sharing their cultures, building something new. The fortresses exist so this can exist." On the final day of the tour, Chun took Krathi to the Planetary Defense Command Center. The walls were covered with displays showing not just New Perth's defenses, but the entire network of fortress worlds across the sector. Hundreds of them, all connected, all watching, all ready to support each other if threatened. "The Vex are still out there," Chun explained, pointing to the galactic map where Vex-controlled territory showed in red. "They've stopped advancing, but they haven't gone away. Every few years they test our defenses, looking for weakness. They never find it. The fortress network has held for 8 decades, and it will hold for 800 more if necessary." Krathi studied the map. The Vex controlled perhaps a fifth of the galaxy, a dead zone where no other life existed. But they had not expanded beyond that territory since hitting the fortress network. The labyrinth of fortified worlds had created a wall that even the endless swarm could not breach. "What happens now?" Krathi asked. "We've stopped the Vex. We've ended wars of conquest. What does the future look like?" Chun leaned back in her chair, considering the question. "We keep building. We keep fortifying. We keep making sure that every world in the Compact is a place that cannot be taken. And in the meantime, we explore, we trade, we learn from each other. The fortresses buy us time to become something better than what we were." She pulled up another display, this one showing exploration missions pushing into uncharted territory. New colonies being established in distant sectors. Research stations studying everything from ancient alien ruins to theoretical physics. Your great-grandfather attacked us because the Chromoth believed strength meant the ability to conquer, Chan continued. We showed them that real strength means not needing to conquer. Now the Chromoth help defend the compact. Your people guard fortress worlds alongside humans, Renizon, and a dozen other species. That's what the future looks like. All of us, together, making sure no one can destroy what we're building. The graduation ceremony took place the next day on New Perth's surface. Cadets from across the compact stood in formation, representing every member species of the Alliance. Admiral Webb, now ancient but still sharp, gave the commencement address. You are the first generation raised entirely within the compact, he told them. You've never known a galaxy where wars of conquest were normal. You've never had to fear that your homeworld might be invaded while you slept. The Fortress Network has given you that gift. Your duty now is to maintain it for the next generation, and the generation after that, forever. After the ceremony, Crothy found herself back at the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Lieutenant Chun joined her, carrying 2 cups of something hot and sweet that Crothy had learned to enjoy during her visit. What are you thinking about? Chun asked. Crothy took a moment to answer. I'm thinking about what my great-grandfather saw when he approached this world. He saw a fortress and thought it meant you wanted to fight. He was wrong. What do you see? Chun asked. Crothy looked down at New Perth below. At the cities and farms, the parks and schools. The orbital stations and hidden defenses, all woven together into something that was both peaceful and unbreakable. I see a garden, she said finally. A garden with very, very good fences. Chun smiled, the same smile her great-grandmother might have worn a century ago. That's exactly what it is. That's what the whole galaxy is becoming. Not an empire. Not a conquest. Just a garden where different species can grow together, protected by walls that cannot fall. She raised her cup in a toast. To the Fortress Galaxy. May it stand forever. Crothy raised her own cup and touched it to Chun's. Below them, New Perth continued its peaceful existence. A fortress world that had never needed to fire its weapons in anger, but would be ready if that day ever came. Around it, 847 other fortress worlds maintained their eternal watch. And between them, inside the labyrinth that humanity had built, trillions of beings lived their lives in peace. The Chromoth had once thought fortresses meant war. They had learned, as the rest of the galaxy had learned, that fortresses meant peace. Real, lasting peace, purchased not with surrender or submission, but with walls so strong that no one dared to test them. And in that peace, something new was growing. Not an empire or a conquest, but a genuine community of different species learning to trust each other because they no longer had to fear each other. The labyrinth that humanity had built across the stars had become not a maze of death, but a sanctuary of life. From her viewport, Crothy watched ships from 100 worlds coming and going, trade and travel flowing freely between fortress worlds that had never fallen. The galaxy had become unconquerable, and in becoming unconquerable, it had become free. It was, she thought, exactly what humanity had promised a century ago. They had turned every planet they touched into a fortress. And in doing so, they had given everyone inside those fortresses the rarest gift in the universe, the certainty that tomorrow would come, and the day after that, and all the days beyond. Secure behind walls that would never break, the Fortress Galaxy stood eternal, not as a monument to fear, but as a testament to hope.